Now, over the last few weeks, the RuneScape economy has changed dramatically. Some items have hit their highest value in the entire history of the game, while others have crashed in value so quickly I've never seen anything like it before. So how exactly has the Tombs of Amascut changed the RuneScape economy forever, potentially? Now, the Tombs of Amascut has probably had one of the widest reaching effects on the economy of any update ever, causing a huge number of items to drastically change price. Now, we're going to be covering a ton of items today, but what I think is a good place to start is the new items. Raids 3 came with like half a dozen new items, many of them just best in slot. So how is their value held up now that the Tombs of Amascut has been out for almost 2 weeks? Well, let's start with the most expensive item here, and that is the Tunican's Shadow. Each raid thus far has kind of had a showstopper item. Chambers of Zarek was the Twisted Bow, the Theater of Blood was the Scythe, and now we have the Tunican's Shadow, completing the combat triangle. Now, because these items are pretty new, the meta for this is very unknown, but it's clear just from the stats and just initial testing that the Tunican's Shadow is extremely strong across a wide variety of content. On release, the Tunican's Shadow was going for 3 build plus, but very quickly dropped below max cash. That said, ever since August 28th, it really hasn't lost any value and has held pretty steady around 1.8 bill or so. Now, I say stable kind of relatively, of course it is going all over the place. This big dip here potentially was going to be a significant crash, but on September 1st, they actually announced that they were going to be nerfing the drop rates a little bit, which actually caused the Shadow to go from 1.7 bill up to 1.9 bill. Now, while this item is incredibly strong, I think it is not likely to stay at this price for a long period of time, mainly due to the fact that the Tombs of Amascut is extremely popular, accessible, fun, and tons of people are doing it, which honestly, that's the best reason possible for an item to lose value. Now, probably one of the more surprising items here is actually the Osmund's Fang. This is one that, while it was announced with all the other ones, for some reason in all of the promotional material, they just didn't mention the Fang ever. Now, of course, the first one went for a bill plus and it crashed very quickly, but this is actually one of the few items that has gone up significantly since the first day or two. The Fang went down to about as low as 220 mil or something like that, and has since nearly doubled, and there's a couple reasons why. On release, the Osmund's Fang was actually bugged. The way that it calculated damage was just not correct and not what was pulled, so the DPS of the Fang was actually significantly less than what it was meant to be. But at the same time, it was still a popular item and people were still using it, which means it still had a lot of value in its nerfed state. But once the item was fixed, the price skyrocketed up to nearly 400 mil. I think a lot of people assumed the Osmund's Fang would be kind of a niche item for shredding extremely high defense monsters that you could kill with melee, but it turns out it's good at a ton of different monsters and extremely useful within the Tombs of Amascut itself, being the best in slot melee weapon for most of the actual raid. So although the Osmund's Fang is theoretically one of the more common items to get, it's still valued at 300 mil plus after a couple of days, which is incredibly impressive. Now, as for the Masri armor set, it once again started at a bill plus and quickly dropped in value. Once again, we can see this big dip here where it started to decline quickly, but then they actually nerfed the drop rates a little bit, so it kind of jumped back up. Here we have the Masri body, which is best in slot and is currently valued at around 500 mil. The Masri chaps are valued at around 400 mil, and the Masri mask is valued at around 120 mil. There's not too much to say about this, it's just the new best in slot ranged armor. Over time, it's just going to lose value as more people do the raid, but for now, it's just best in slot and a lot of people want it. Now, an item that's actually crashed incredibly quickly is the Elidness Ward. The first one was sold for a bill, but now it's worth 40 mil, so it has crashed very quickly, and I think there's one main reason, and that is the fact that the Elidness Ward is much more common than the Arcane Sigil, which you actually need to create it. So I think it's going to be very comparable to the Pegasian Crystal. The Pegasian Crystal is objectively a very powerful upgrade, but you need Ranger Boots to create it, and Ranger Boots are much less common. So there's way too many excess wards in the game that are dwarfing the amount of Arcane Sigils, which means I think this is just destined to become a junk item unless they make a change to it. And finally, we have the Lightbearer. Not too much to say about this. It was clearly going to be one of the least valuable items. Right off the bat, you can see the first one was only sold for around 300 mil, and now is worth around 50 mil. There has been a lot of fluctuation in this item price as people kind of try it out within the Tombs of Amascut. There's been some buffs and nerfs to the content, and for a while it seemed like the Lightbearer might be kind of useful, but with every change, the meta for it kind of changes a bit as well. But it's clearly, a more niche item. So although we have some brand new items with TOA, the real story in my mind is on the existing item pool and how the new raid has affected all these other items. Pretty much right off the bat, we can divide the items between those that are useful within the third raid and those that aren't. If it's useful in the raid, it's shot up a ton. If it's not, it's crashed pretty much. So let's start off with some items that are useful in the raid. First up here, we have the Grazi Rapier, which went from 120 mil up to like 220 mil just in a day or two. For the first week or so, most people were using the Rapier on most of the melee encounters in the raid, although recently it started to crash as more people are preferring to use the Osmond's Fang actually, but it's still valued much higher than, last month. The Sanguinesti staff is just one of the best mage weapons to use. Obviously the Shadow of Tumikin would be preferred, but that item is like 1.8 bill, so most people can afford it. The Sang staff is a great option and provides healing, so it's very popular. It gained about 40 mil in value just this month, which is pretty crazy. The Serp Helm went from like 4 mil to a max of like 9 mil just in a day because there's a lot of things that poison you in the raid, and a lot of people prefer the Serp Helm. Now thanks to that, Zulrah scales are pretty much at an all-time high and peaked at 320 GP per scale, which is crazy. That's like the highest that we've seen it almost ever. Another item that has seen a ton of growth this month is the Dragon Claw. It's a very useful spec weapon in the raid and has gone from 85 mil up to a peak of 120 mil, which is like a 40 mil increase right there. An item that has seen a surprising amount of growth is the Avernic Defender Hilt. Before the raid, it was worth 38 mil, and now it's gone up to a peak of 84 mil, over doubling in price. You use melee a lot in the raid, and the Avernic is the best in slot item. Not sure why that one went up so much more than others, but it is by far one of the best in slot items to use there. The Twisted Bow is at one of the highest prices I've ever seen. We're close to a 1.3 bill right now, making the item extremely unaffordable, but there's a reason for that. It's really useful in the raid, and you use it in multiple different rooms. Although another option, of course, is the Bow of Ferdinand, which has seen a pretty big increase as well. Going from around 150 mil up to 210, and with it, any other crystal item has seen a big increase as well. Look at Enhanced Teleport Seeds, going from 2.8 mil up to 5 mil. I wish I hadn't sold mine like a month ago. I would have made like an extra 120 mil off that. Sad. And even stuff like the Dex Prayer Scroll, I mean, it's going crazy. It went from 11 mil up to, some of them sold for 30 mil this week. I don't really know why. Obviously, Rigor is extremely useful, but I'm not sure why right now we're seeing tons of volatility. And one final item, let's have a look at the Hasta, going from 10 mil up to 20 mil. People are using the Hasta as a good alternative to the Osmond's Fang or the Rapier. It's a much cheaper option, but has doubled in price due to that. Obviously, there's other items I could touch on, but those are some of the major ones that have seen huge price increases this week. Now, on the flip side here, there are a ton of items that have fallen in value this month, and it would be kind of pointless to list all of them because that would take hours. Pretty much anything that is not directly usable in the raid has lost value, even if it's the most unrelated thing possible. And that's mainly due to the fact that many people actually are selling items in their bank to afford more viable raid gear. So for example, something like a Dragon Warhammer, which turns out is not that useful in the raid, or at least not known to be yet, dropped nearly in half, dropped from 50 mil down to 30 mil just in a couple of days, huge decrease. The Dragon's Lance dropped from 80 mil down to almost 50 mil. The Spectral Spirit Shield dropped from 90 mil down to 60 mil. There are so many items you can look at right now, and there's no point really listing all of them. I'm just gonna go over a couple notable ones. Probably the hardest hit item of all is the Harmonized Orb. The Harmonized Orb has fallen in value by so much this month. If you look back at the beginning of August, it was worth 750 mil, and now it's worth half that. Now it's a little misleading if we look back at the last year. It's not down as much, but still. Not only is the Harmonized Orb not used in TOA, but also the Shadow of Tumikin is objectively stronger than it in most locations, so it's kind of getting screwed over from two things here. Another item that's seen a significant crash is actually the Ring of Endurance. Kind of a random item, but it's gone from 45 mil down to almost in half, down to 26 mil at the lowest. I think there was actually a fair bit of speculation that the Ring of Endurance would actually be useful in the raid due to the fact that there was supposedly Hallowed Sepulchre-esque, encounters. Well, it turns out you don't need run energy at all, which means, yeah, it crashed hard, and it's hard to say how much of this last year's value is already priced in, but it's at an all-time low. And finally here, another big ticket item that has lost a ton of value this month is the Scythe. It went from around 600 mil down to, I think, a low of 400 mil, so a really significant crash. I mean, we always have to look at the last year in context. It just turns out the Scythe isn't that useful in the raid, or at least not known to be yet, so the Scythe has seen a pretty significant sell-off. Now, another item that has been surprisingly affected by the Tombs of Amascut is actually the bond. TOA has actually reduced the price of bonds by a significant amount. They went from 7 mil down to like 5 mil just after the release. They've recovered a bit, but they're still much cheaper than before. And the best explanation I have for that is that people were buying bonds to afford some of the better gear for raids. So if you didn't have enough money in game and you needed to buy gold, you can do it legally through bonds, thus flooding the market with more bonds and reducing the overall price of them. This is a trend that we can see pretty often when high ticket content comes out. Bonds usually actually go down in price because more people are purchasing them. So the end of the summer has been pretty crazy for the RuneScape economy, but I'm kind of excited to see what happens in the fall, where the Tombs of Amascut items eventually land, and when things will finally recover. Now, before I go here, I want to give a giant thank you to all of my members over on YouTube. Thank you so much to March3258 and Pewter, who just joined the Dragon tier, joining the Hybrid, Alejandra, and Kush Patel. Thank you guys so much, really appreciate it. Also, thank you to YoYoSub89, Carter, Mexos, and NDM001 for subscribing at the Runite tier. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.